Growing up in a small town in the middle of Kansas in the 1970s meant that not only was there not much to do as a slightly mischievous teenager, but if you want to do something, anything, you had to come up with it yourself. This usually meant anything from the fairly innocuous, like cramming as many friends as I could fit into my trunk to sneak them into the drive-in, to the slightly more unlawful, like trying to break into the Five and Dime in the dead of night. Relax, we didn't actually succeed on that one. One of my buddies, Donnie, had slightly macabre tastes. He managed to get a hold of an anatomy-class skeleton that he liked to pose around his house, and his dream was to one day get a real casket to put the skeleton in. That's the kind of guy Donnie was. Whenever we left, it was up to Donnie to decide where the night would take us. It was usually in the macabre vein. He liked to explore old cemeteries, abandoned hospitals, things of that nature. On one particular Saturday night, he said we should explore an old abandoned farmhouse he had spotted along the side of a country road. We didn't hear any better ideas, so Donnie, Pat, Hoodie, and I all piled into my Rambler and headed out. Donnie only vaguely remembered where the place was. It took us an eternity of winding down pitch-black roads before Donnie finally excitedly exclaimed, "That's it!" The place was creepy looking. The house itself was fairly typical of the area. It was a stark, two-story affair, which was probably painted a dull gray at some point, but almost all the paint had since peeled away, leaving behind the exposed wooden planks dying and cracking in the Kansas heat. Illuminated in the moonlight, the planks looked like a rib cage. Most of the house's windows had long since been broken. Only a couple of windows on the second story remained intact. No one had bothered boarding up the broken windows, suggesting no one had looked after this property for a long time. A porch circled the house, but the porch was sagging and leaning with age. As I pulled my car into the driveway in the front of the house, my headlights shot into the house through the broken front windows. When I cut the car off, it suddenly hit me how dark it was out here in the middle of nowhere. We waited in our car for a few moments as our eyes adjusted to the new light. Once we stepped out of the car, we started taking inventory of our surroundings. The moonlight only gave us the slightest of clues about what lay on the property. About 50 yards behind the house stood a large garage of some sort. There was a third building beyond what may have been a small barn. On our left was an expansive field that probably used to be a field of wheat or corn, but now was just an overgrown mess of weeds and sunflowers, most of which were well over 6 feet tall. I suddenly became unnerved looking at the field, gently swaying in the evening summer breeze. Anything could be out in that field, I thought to myself as a soft shiver went up my spine. The moment of creepiness was broken by my buddies piling out of the car. We all stood there for a moment soaking it all in. The only noise was the non-stop thrum of the locusts in the trees. It was Donnie who eventually broke the silence. "I've driven by this place plenty of times and never see anyone near it. It's definitely abandoned." It didn't really need to be said. The sorry state of the place confirmed a human hadn't been living in there for years, probably decades. Pat made the first move. He bounded up the stairs on the porch towards the front door. One of the ancient steps partially gave way under his weight. The rest of us were careful to hop over that step. The front door was as dry and as warped as the rest of the house. Pat gave it only a slight shove with his shoulder, and the door swung open violently inwards with a faint creak. I clicked on my flashlight and scanned the inside of the place. Off to the right was a mostly empty room and a narrow hallway that ran along the bottom of the staircase, advancing into the pitch-black house beyond. I took in the details of the room to our right. Only a few random pieces of furniture remained. An end table sat in one corner, covered in a thick layer of dust. The wooden door was now covered in leaves and other debris blown in through the broken windows. We started down the hallway and ran to the back of the house. The house had a very strong, musty smell to it, like damp earth. The wooden floorboards creaked and groaned underneath our feet. The first wave of panic and claustrophobia swept over me as all four of us shuffled through that cramped hallway. For the first time it dawned on me how vulnerable we were if some maniac wanted to confront us with an axe or something. Every fiber of my being wanted to turn around and get the hell out of this place. I couldn't do such a thing in front of my buddies, though, so I reluctantly trudged forward. The end of the hallway branched left and right. To the right was a narrow door. I pulled it and opened to reveal a small bathroom, more like a closet with a toilet in it. Like everything else in the house, it only had a story of decades of neglect. I swung my flashlight to the left to reveal what remained of the house's kitchen. We all filed into the little room and swung our flashlights around. Like the rest of the house, the kitchen was coated in a thick layer of dust, and we stood upon a layer of leaves. Nothing much remained in the little kitchen, except for a small round table off in the corner. And that's where Hoodie saw it. "What the hell is that?" he asked, his voice coming out in a choked whisper. We all swung our flashlights over to the table. Sitting on top of the table was a prosthetic arm. It was the kind that was designed to attach at the elbow, plastic cuff narrowed down to what could be the wrist. At the end of the prosthetics were two angry-looking hooks. We all stared at the thing for what seemed like an eternity. Finally, Pat broke the silence. "Anyone else notice that it doesn't have dust all over it?" It hadn't occurred to me, but he was right. Everything in this place was buried in dust, but not the arm. It looked like it had been placed there recently. We all slowly rotated to face the doorway through which we had entered, halfway expecting a one-armed lunatic to come screaming through. Instead, all we could hear was our own panicked breathing, and of course the locusts outside. Always those locusts. "Should we take it?" Donnie asked. Of course Donnie would want that hideous thing. "No, Donnie!" I snapped. "What the hell are you gonna do with it?" "I could think of something," Donnie grinned. That made us all chuckle. Something needed to break the tension. "Oh, let's check it out upstairs," Pat volunteered. We shuffled back through the narrow hallway and then turned up the stairs. At the top of the stairs, the place opened up to one bedroom facing us and two more off to the right. The bedroom immediately facing us was more of the same. It was empty except for random junk, like a large milk churn sitting in the corner of the room. Like everywhere else in the house, the wooden floor was covered in branches and leaves. Oddly, only one thing still adorned the walls in the room. A crude cross had been made, fashioned out of popsicle sticks, probably by a child. It hung from a tack in the wall by a length of red yarn. Pat grunted as his flashlight paused on the cross for a moment. We made our way to the next bedroom, more of the same. It was empty, save for a burlap sack lying on the middle of the floor. Donnie nudged it around with the toe of his shoe, seemingly disappointed that it was empty. So far, our trip to a spooky, abandoned house had been anything but. The only thing that managed to unnerve us was some poor old guy's fake arm. Everyone was starting to get restless at this point. Our thoughts were turning to where we would go after this. Probably pick up a case of beer and watch TV at Hoodie's house, like always. With our interest quickly waning, we walked into the last bedroom. It took a moment for us to all focus on the thing on the floor. In the darkness, there appeared to be a large black mass lying in the middle of the floor. Even as all of our flashlights focused on it, it took a moment for us to recognize what we were looking at. In the darkness, there appeared to be a large black mass lying in the middle of the floor. Even as all of our flashlights focused on it, it took a moment for us to recognize what we were looking at. It was covered in fine, dark brown hair. A larger mane of slightly lighter hair sprouted out of the top. It was a horse's head, and it was real. A large pool of deep red blood around it confirmed that it was real. The mouth was twisted into a hideous grimace, and the eyes were opened wide and frenzied. We stood still for a moment. Of course, Donnie was the first to advance and get a closer look. "Guys, this is fresh. Look, the blood hasn't even dried yet." "It doesn't smell yet either," Pat stammered. "It hasn't been here long." We all slowly turned towards the doorway again. We were expecting something to come thundering up the stairs. We had seen too many movies. I finally broke the silence. "So maybe we should get out of here before whoever left that thing wants to bring in something else." The other guys half laughed and half grunted in agreement. We took one long last look at the horse's head and made our way down the stairs. At the bottom of the stairs, we tried to theorize what exactly we had found. "Maybe a farmer slaughtered his horse?" "Sure, but why drag the head into the house?" I countered. "Yeah, and why choose an abandoned house in the middle of nowhere?" Pat said. "There ain't no working farm around here." Donnie's voice came from behind us, barely above a whisper. "Guys." We all turned to face him. Donnie's face had lost all color. "Guys, the arm is gone." "What?" I said. Donnie's voice now erupted into a panicked cry. "The arm is gone!" Without exchanging a word, we all dashed out of the house to my Rambler as fast as we could, skidding on the gravel as we reached the car. Once we got inside and slammed the doors, we started to feel a little more settled. We rolled down the windows and Pat and Hoodie lit up some cigarettes. We sat in silence as the car stared at the house in the darkness. "So someone must be around here," Donnie said. "I mean, right?" "Hell, I don't know, Donnie." We sat in silence for another few moments, scanning the surroundings for any hint of movement. The only sound was the steady hum of locusts. Suddenly we heard something out in the field to our left. I'll try my best to describe the sound because I had never heard anything like it before, and never since. It sounded something like a cough, but it was strangled and choked. More of a hacking wheeze that would come out of a person dying of emphysema. That lone alien noise reverberated with us for a long moment, and we all stared wide-eyed into the field. We didn't dare so much as to breathe. Maybe you should start the car, Pat stuttered. I wasn't going to argue. I fired up the car and flipped on the headlights. The field to our left remained unchanged, a mass of vegetation slowly swaying in the breeze. The silence was broken by a large thud on the back of my car. It was something heavy. The back of my Rambler had actually dipped down with the impact. That was enough. I threw the Rambler into drive and roared out of the driveway, spraying gravel in a huge rooster tail as I went. The guys were in a frenzy inside the car. They were jabbering and shouting and whipping their heads around in every direction with their eyes. As we got back to the main road, they calmed down a little and the mood turned into excited whoops. We eventually followed through with our plan to pick up a case of beer and go back to Hoodie's house. The rest of the night was spent pondering just what exactly we had experienced. The next morning I drove myself home as I parked the Rambler in the driveway. As I circled around the car to my porch, I noticed something on the car. There was a wide smear across the sedan's white trunk lid. It was reddish-brown, a lot like blood, I thought. I got my garden hose and tried to spray it off. It didn't want to immediately come off, so I got a sponge and scrubbed at it. The stuff stunk. The sickly sweet smell of rot. That was our last time venturing into an old abandoned house. Donnie would bring it up every so often, and the rest of us would chuckle and exchange nervous glances.